And I would say the major problem of why there's lack of affordability is the government. His professor, Edward Glaser, has a great paper which basically looks at people's willingness to pay for different amenities, and without getting into the sophisticated econometric techniques, he says it's not land that's scarce, it's government permission to build on land that's scarce. And that explains your thing, is how can you have two identical pieces of property? One across the street is $1 million per acre, and one is only $50 per acre. And it's simply, one has government permission to build, and the other does not. Bryce mentioned an interesting example of the Toll Brothers in a development having to spend $2 million on legal fees. Just to give an example of something in California, a project I was involved with, there was this very large development. It was actually 6,000 homes, I believe it was. Huge development called Fort Ord. It's a former military base that got privatized, the size of San Francisco. And at the last minute, a congressman came in and he said, okay, you guys are going to charge $800,000 per home. I think that I'm going to tell you to sell half of them for $300,000 per home. And so this is not just a small amount of money. And we calculated the amount of money involved. We got paid. It was just a last minute thing. They said, could you write a critique of this, how this might harm the development? And so my co-author came to me and he said, what do we know about affordable housing mandates? And I said, price controls are bad, right? So it's a very simple economic analysis that pretty much every economist agrees with. We wrote this up, but once we did the calculations, we figured out that this regulation was going to decrease their revenue from this project by not $2 million, $500 million. There was a bunch of developers. Yeah, there was 6 large ones. So we're talking serious money. Also, the amount of regulations that just prevent these things from getting done is just astounding. I was talking to this one gentleman who was involved in the project, and I said, where do you live? And he said, I live in Monterey. And I said, oh, how long have you lived here? And he said, 14 years. And I said, oh, what brought you to the area? This project hadn't gotten started yet. And he said, I came here to start this project. 14 years of just going to government meetings after government meetings, and surprise, surprise, why don't we see enough housing, and why is housing unaffordable in places like California and Boston? So those are just some examples. Another funny thing I thought of when you showed your map, they add these regulations on top of each other. So they say, well, we've got this one minimum lot size, but then we've got this other one. And by the time you get down to it, there's all of these greater regulations that people didn't think about. So one funny example in a town near me, they say each home has to have 100 square feet of outdoor space, like a balcony. But then they also say, and the minimum, it has to have one side that's a minimum of 10 feet. So basically they're saying it's got to be a minimum of 10 by 10. But why didn't they just say it's got to be 10 by 10? It's got, like, just adding all of these things on top of each other, that if they just started out with the one, okay, it's got to be 10 by 10 or greater, it would be a lot simpler. So you've got millions of problems. An issue that we encounter a lot is when, at least my co-author and I are talking about these regulations, the assumption, which Lowell mentioned, is, oh, we can pass these regulations, and all it's going to do is just going to eat into the developers' profits. And that's not going to be a problem. Developers are rich enough already, and it's not going to affect the supply of housing. Well, the problem with this thinking is, in economic lingo, is it's not thinking at the margin. So economists think as, what do small changes do to the incentives of developers right now? And developers are always deciding whether to build right now or not based on their marginal profits. And the idea that developers are making these profits of, some people assume they're making profit rates of 100%. If this was the case, right, I think everybody in the world would want to be a developer, because if you've got these extra normal profits, it's going to encourage people to come in, okay, until those profits get down to the normal levels. So people who we've encountered just don't understand this. I think it's almost a Marxist idea that the developers are just exploiting people and they're making these extremely high profits. And it's funny when we encounter people, they have these weird notions about economics. So Bryce, you'll appreciate this one. We found one article where they said, you know, it doesn't really matter what we do if we increase regulations or decrease profits for builders. They're going to build the same amount. It's not going to affect quantity or price. And they said, price is only determined by demand. And I think when I took my principles class, I think that one of the lessons from economics is price is determined by demand and supply. Okay, these two things. But this was published in a top law review, actually. I think it was the Fordham Law Review. And then I saw a footnote, and I said, wow, there's someone who actually says this, and I want to read who's saying this. And I looked it up, and I'm paraphrasing here, but the footnote basically said, well, I was talking to my friend in Berkeley, and he said this. And I looked up this guy's credentials, and the guy had no economics training whatsoever. But these are the types of arguments that you hear in the public policy discourse, and it's no wonder that we're stuck with these crazy policies. Another group who I've debated on 2 separate occasions. Usually I don't support most laws or product licensing laws, but when it comes to calling yourself an economist, I think the government needs to have more laws. There's this group, they call themselves Bay Area Economics, and they go around to different cities and they say, oh, well, these types of price controls will not have any effect on the market in this city. And I was like, just puzzled by this. Is not something that hardly any economist would agree with. And I looked up the credentials of every single person in this group, and the highest economic credential someone had was a PhD in sociology. So it's like, these people are not economists, but they're going around calling themselves economists. So it's kind of an unfortunate situation is that they're passing these bad policies onto people, and in the name of economics. All right, so I guess the one point I would like to make, and I apologize if I'm going to disagree with Ron for a few minutes, but my position is affordability in housing is a good goal, and we all should be supporting that. But I disagree that government should be actively saying, we are going to force developers to produce affordable housing, because my own research and my own ideas is that whenever the government does this, they're actually going to have the opposite effect. And let me just give a couple examples and address a couple of the things you said. You mentioned how certain areas are getting redeveloped, and the result is you've got a blighted area which gets maybe knocked down and then turned into a higher income area. Well, most people will look at that and say, okay, look, the immediate consequence whenever you build an expensive home is it's hurting the poor people, because you're not building a home for the poor. Well, actually, my own opinion is that anytime you build housing, even if it's for high-income people, it's going to benefit all income groups. And that's one of the things that I think, unfortunately, the building industry has to face this idea that people think that housing is a bad thing, right? I don't know why people think that, but and it might have to do with them being monopolists and saying, well, we don't want new building. But there's this idea where people say, does housing pay for itself? No one makes that argument about any other good. They don't say, does food pay for itself? Do cars pay for themselves? Housing, like any other good, is a good thing, and the more of it, the better. So whenever you build a high-income house, basically what you're doing is enabling a high-income family to move from their middle-tier house that they are now freeing up. Once that high-income family frees up that house, you're then enabling a middle-income family to upgrade as well. And once you have that middle-income family's home, you're enabling a low-income family. So even when you have new housing that's only high income, it actually benefits all income groups. So we can think about it as adding an additional rung to the ladder. That's not making people worse off, it's making people better off. And there's been studies on this, is that each additional new home generates, and I think it was about 3 new moves, something on that order. So that's just one thing there. And let me just see what else I wanted to say. And then another couple things I will mention briefly is the idea of density bonuses. I support density bonuses as perhaps a way of making housing more affordable, but why do we need to couple the density bonus with the affordable housing mandate? Why don't we just give the density bonus to begin with, okay? If we want more housing, right, just give the density bonus. You don't have to couple the density bonus with price controls. Just have the density bonus to begin with. So I agree there's some offsetting benefits of having 30 units per acre versus 20 units per acre, but why not just do the 30 units per acre? That's going to increase housing supply more than having it with that qualifications. And then I guess the last thing I will say, just to disagree with Bryce, just on the one small point, since I'm an economist, I loved your presentation, but I do want to just disagree with the one small thing is the impact fees as side payments. I do have an article coming out in the Boston University Public Interest Law Journal on this, and California is very, very into impact fees, and the idea is we can calculate them according to some Pigovian ideal where we're saying, okay, you're going to impact the community by this, and we'll just charge you this. But in reality, it's calculated through politics, and they're misusing these tools to say, okay, the marginal impact of a car in our city is $10,000. So the traffic impact fee is $10,000 in many cities. Other cities, the marginal traffic impact fee they charge is $0. Now, is there really that marginal difference in reality? I don't know, but it seems like that it's more likely to be driven by politics rather than economic efficiency. And as a result, those homes are going to be more expensive by close to the amount of the impact fee. And I spoke to one developer, and he said in one area he was dealing with the total impact fees were upwards of $150,000. So that's a serious cost that you're going to add to housing. And then these are only disagreeing with your last slide, so not to say I disliked your presentation. The last slide, the other thing you mentioned is, what about allowing side payments to allow the local residents to be compensated for the displeasure that they receive of new housing? Well, with that, you're basically still going to allow the existing residents to say, well, you've got to pay me $100,000, you got to pay me $1 million, whatever it is. When you're giving the local residents the authority to veto unless they pay what they don't, unless they're compensated, that's still going to act as a tax on new housing. If you've got to get permission from everyone to get to build, that's going to act as a tax on new housing. And yes, I agree with all your charts that prices are going to go up, but if you're still allowing people to have that veto power, prices are going to they could be even higher, right? I just don't like neighbors. You got to pay me $10 million to compensate me for having a neighbor. So that might be an unintended consequence of that as well. And then finally, I will just wrap up because to just comment on some of the ideas we had. Overall, some people mentioned that some planning is necessary and some regulation is necessary. And I will have a kind of a counter to that I will say some planning is necessary and some rules are necessary. But why do we assume that these rules must come from the government? Okay? So the governments, as we've seen, have been historically bad at messing up the housing markets and misusing these regulations not to, help the community, but to exclude outsiders, to exclude the poor. I would say an alternative to government zoning is private zoning. So Lowell, you can comment on Santana Row in San Jose is one of my favorite areas. It's a privately planned city almost in San Jose, which has hotels, restaurants, retail, apartments, condominiums. And so you've got a bunch of rules, people preventing their neighbors from building garbage dumps next to the luxury condos. And as a result of this, they've internalized all of these externalities, and the property there is selling for, I think, roughly 3 times per square foot the property in the neighboring city. So that's an example of private development. Another one that I'd like to hear your comments on if you know anything about it, but the city of Celebration, Florida is a completely privately planned city. Almost no government intervention involved. Who did it? Disneyland. They said, okay, people want to have these homes. They don't want to have the homes too close together. And they realized, what did the customer want? And they created a bunch of rules, but it was an alternative to the government set of rules. And the result is a beautiful city. The property values there are also much higher than the neighboring cities as well. So I think there's much different incentives when you turn to private zoning. You've got the profit motive involved, and you don't have government bossing people around and misusing the political process to exclude people. So, thank you.